So good day everyone. We are Group 6 and we are assigned to discuss the book of Franz Fanon, Black Skin and White Mask. Our contents to discuss the introduction and background of the book. Franz Fanon was an author of The Black Skin and White Mask, was actually an Afro-French psychiatrist and a philosopher. So since he is a black, actually he's a black kasi nga Afro siya, but then later on, he is also being distinguished as being French since he lived in one of the cities of French. So, when he grew up in colonial rule and because of that, nagiging exposed siya on how the colonialism and racism actually work. So, he was passionate on being critic of racism that characterized the colonialism. So, the Black Skin, White Mask book was actually in nothing thinking that it is a study of impact on the black psyche and on the white psyche. When we say black psyche, the meaning of it refers to how specific psychological and cultural experiences of a people who are black, what they go into through that experience. So basically, it is a study of black people's experience. That's what black psych means. And the psychological effects of colonialism, here he analyzed how the blacks internalize the inferiority because of the because of the white gaze. So white gaze imposes their stereotypes. So it is partly based on a clinical observation by Franz Fanon, since he is a psychiatrist, basically he observed how the white gaze affect some black people, how they look into them, that affects their mental health and their perception to their self. Because in later on discussion, it will be mentioned that negro. So parang nagiging objectify yung isang tao kahit hindi naman dapat at hindi na siya separate yung thinking nila about it. So basically that's racism. So, yun, Franz Fanon talk about which will be discussed after by the next reporter. Yun, yung thinking na yan yung nag-create ng conflict on psychological, colonial perspective, and so on. So, the colonial racism assumed that colonized people were inferior to those of the ruling kasi they have the power. So, of course, magkakaroon ng inferiority complex. So, their culture and their value was also inferior. Kaya nagkakaroon ng tinatawag na self-hatred. Kasi, di ba, parang pag nakakolonize tayo na isang bansa, nagkakaroon ng thinking na mababa yung tingin natin sa sarili natin kasi gino-glorify yung whiteness nila na superior tong mga European dahil mas marunong sila at yan nga dahil puti sila. So this white gaze causes harm to the blacks on what they call the negro. They are creating stereotypes on it and blacks do not see themselves in their own, but instead they see themselves as how the other people sees them. So yun yung nagkakos ulit again ng psychological harm and colonial system. So yun, nag-lead siya sa conflict into a cultural inauthenticity. So the book of Franz was of course calling for freedom in a political decolonization and both in mind and society. So there are a lot of factors pa na may discuss later on. Next reporter.
For the fact of blackness, by Franz Fanon, it explores the psychological life experiences of black people in a world dominated by white people. So when Fanon recounts the moment on the train where a child shouts, "Look, a negro," it marks a sudden reduction of his existence to skin color. Kasi nga imbis na parang tawagin siya na there's a man, there's a people walking sa gilid ng train, tinawag siyang negro. So Heidegger implies through being through others that we are becoming aware of becoming ourselves through others, and living isn't just about yourself kasi. So sa being through others kasi ni Heidegger, sinasabi niya dito na tayo, hindi lang tayo visible sa sarili natin. Visible din tayo sa ibang tao. Kaya yung being through others is becoming ourselves through others, and living isn't just about yourself but how others see you, just as they perceive a black man on the train. So which became subject to racism kasi nga tinawag siyang negro. And the ontology or being cannot fully or not or nor partially expresses one's own being and identity. So the colonizer dictates who they are, and that shape how stereotype imposed on the black people. And nagkakos yun ng distress sa kanila. And parang hindi nila totally natututunan kung ano ba yung true being nila kasi nga nasi-shape ng society yung sarili nila based sa kung ano yung ine-impose ng society sa kanila. Next is the bodily schema versus racial schema. So before racism, one experiences body naturally. For example, if we want to smoke, we would reach the right side of the table to take a pack of cigarette. However, the match is on the other side of the table, where we have to lean slightly. So this action is taught, it isn't taught, but it is an implicit knowledge of how body responds freely to what we want to do naturally. And so, nagiging schema to na nagdi-distort the way we experience our body naturally, no? Kasi it is a schema is a racialized mental image that society imposes, which in return become a burden on the black body, such that epidermal schema. So yung epidermal schema is nag-focus sila sa skin color ng mga black. Epidermal schema, nag-focus sila dun sa color ng skin color ng black people. So nagiging object sila ng racism. Tapos imbis na nagfo-focus sila dun sa full human being ng tao, like yung taong yun, hindi like magfo-focus sila doon sa tao na yun as a person, not as a black person. Kasi nga nagiging object of racism kapag tinitignan nila as ano siya, hindi siya tao, black man siya. And next is yeah, so their natural sense of self is replaced by a painful awareness of being seen as a black man. Yun nga yung sinasabi ko. And he added, so Fanon added that he lived in a three different place where he lived for himself, for his body, and as a black man who is in true racism. So dahil sa society, na-shape niya yung sarili niya into three different places. And and as a black man who is in true racism, he recalls the train encounters where a kid shout that he is frightened seeing as a black man. So sa tatlong place na nakita niya yung sarili niya, yung pangatlo yung parang nag-reduce ng self niya as a being kasi nga hindi siya nakikita ng society as himself or kung paano niya nakikita yung sarili niya. Because nakikita siya as or parang na-perceive siya as a threat.
After describing the moment of racial objectification, Fanon turns to the deeper effect it has on the self, which is the loss of subjectivity. He explains that once the black person becomes seen not only through the white gaze, he no longer controls how he is defined. His existence is confined to the image others project onto him, which is the Negro, an identity constructed by colonial history and white imagination. So Fanon emphasizes that this isn't just a social label, it is an ontological wound. It alters one's very sense of being. Even if he tries to affirm himself as an intelligent, moral, rational person, he will realize that none of this matter to a society that has already decided what he is. His effort to explain or prove himself will collapse because prejudice is not built on reason. It is built on inherent fear, stereotypes, and cultural myth. And what's striking is how Fanon links this to existential alienation. So, drawing from Sartre's idea that consciousness depends on recognition by others, Fanon shows that the black man is denied that mutual recognition. He exists not as a subject who defines himself, but an object constantly defined by others. He becomes aware of himself not through freedom but through constraints. He is seen, judged, and categorized at the very moment. So this loss of subjectivity is what Fanon means by being overdetermined from the outside. His existence is trapped in an identity constructed long before he even speaks. It is not just a misunderstanding, it is his humanity that is never truly seen. So Fanon then expresses this emotional weight to this realization. So he describes feeling shame, anger, and nausea. So it is not simply a personal emotion, but deep responses to the constant tension between how he sees himself and how the world sees him. His body becomes both hypervisible but invisible at the same time. Everyone sees his color, but no one sees him. He tries to resist by asserting himself intellectually, by using his knowledge, reason, and dignity. But he finds that rational argument don't penetrate the walls of racial fear. Racism is not logical. It operates through emotion and social conditioning. This is why when Fanon demonstrates equality or brilliance, the white gaze still reduces him to the given stereotype. So this emotional dissonance creates a painful split in consciousness. Fanon himself as both an object and a subject, human and a symbol, insider and the outsider, he belongs to humanity, yet he is treated as something less than human. This alienation explains his description of the feeling of nausea. It is the physical reaction to being torn between self-knowledge and imposed identity. So in simple terms, Fanon shows that racism doesn't just hurt the body or the social standing, it fractures the psyche. It forces a person to live a double awareness, to know oneself and at the same time be constantly aware of how one is misrecognized by the society. So after exposing this alienation, Fanon explores how Black people might respond to it, particularly through the Negritude movement, which sought to reclaim pride in Black identity and African heritage. So Fanon appreciates its power. For him, Negritude is an act of psychological and cultural recovery. It is a way to say we are not what colonialism say we are. It is a stage of reasserting dignity and belonging after centuries of dehumanization. However, Fanon also recognizes its limitation. He warns that if negritude becomes merely the opposite of white supremacy, if it defines blackness in purely essential or romantic terms, it still depends on the same binary logic created by colonialism. It risks turning identity into reaction instead of liberation. So Fanon insists that the goal should not be to replace one hierarchy with another, but to move beyond race altogether. So true freedom, he says, is not about glorifying blackness against whiteness, but it is about restoring the human being as the subject, capable of defining themselves outside of racial categories. So he ends this vision with a universality, a world where color no longer dictates value, where the human being is recognized simply as human. Negritude then is not the final destination, but a necessary way or a passage towards the universal humanism. It is a step in reclaiming selfhood and dignity before transcending the boundaries imposed by racism.
For the Negro and psychopathology, it tackles about how racism affects the mental health that causes psychic traumas to Black people. So, psychoanalytic school is a psychological tradition which Freud develops. The unconscious mind and the early childhood experiences shape a person's being. Fanon criticized this because it doesn't grasp the Black experiences in the colonized racist world. That the root of trauma doesn't come from the family itself, since it affects our being through others. So, thus, psychic traumas comes from past emotional experiences, which didn't happen as a single event, but repeatedly. So, it lasts due to repression, where we expelled it in the consciousness and buries in unconsciousness, where it returns as a disguise in future event that reveals itself, which the being become aware that it wasn't buried, but in a state of impermanent denial of traumas made by the dominant white. And so since Black are colonized, they are forced to shape themselves through the lens of white society, adapting to its attitude. The imposed evil spirit is a psychological trauma, which is not internal but socially imposed, which is why there is a possibility of error in education since Black and white doesn't experience equal suffering. So to clear lang, lahat naman tayo, mapa-Black or white, we have suffering din naman. Pero kasi, hina-highlight ni Fanon yung experience ng Black people towards white people. So sinasabi niya na parang hindi dapat in the same room maituturo ang evil spirit sa Black and white since yung Black nga so grabe nga yung napagdaanan nilang racism sa mga white, and kasi hindi po pwedeng sabihin na ang evil spirit ay dapat na experience din ng white, sila nga din yung nag-impose nun sa mga Black people. So magkakaroon ng error kapag tinuro yun both of them kasi nga hindi sila nagkaroon ng equal suffering, or kumbaga na parang makikita mo doon na mas dominant pa rin yung white if ituturo yun both sa kanila, since ang hina-highlight nga dito ni Fanon is yung Black. So dapat yung evil spirit hindi siya ituro both doon sa dalawa. So magfo-focus lang doon sa Black kasi nga hina-highlight niya yung suffering ng Black, yung ginawa ng white sa kanila na nag-cause sa kanila ng psychic trauma. Meron din ng impact especially on racial form. Ayan. So, diba, it is different from the white since they shape the life and experiences of the Black. So, yun yung sinasabi ko kanina na hindi nga, parang yung white din kasi naman yung may gawa ng psychic trauma sa Black. So, parang anong sense ng evil spirit na ituturo din sa mga white? Kasi parang um, yun nga, hindi naman tayo nagtitake sides sa mga nagkakaroon ng struggle. Pero kasi there is a specific form of struggle na nai-impose sa ibang tao. Kaya nagkakaroon ng error if both is tinuturo sa nag-impose and yung na-oppress. This is, on the other hand, made black people to be feared and alienated simply because of their race. So they are object to be projected to being feared, which implies that they are the creation of fear. So one should be aware of as imposed by society. So they carry danger. That's why they try to fit in, forget their roots as being black in order to at least be accepted. So yun nga, dahil colonized nga ang black, syempre, they have to fit in sa binabato sa kanilang ng society. Kasi kung hindi sila mag-try to fit in, ganyan, parang na-alienated na rin sila as a person or kahit pa as a black person. Kasi nga, tinitignan sila ng mga white or ng mga nang colonize as a yung pinakang low level of person. So they forget their roots and tries to fit in doon sa sinashape sa kanila ng society.
Continue is the psychoanalytic critique. Fanon draws from Freud and Jung to analyze the human mind under colonialism. He critiques Western psychoanalysis because it focuses only on individual or family issues, ignoring how racism and colonialism shapes the psyche. For Fanon, the colonized mind is not just personal, it's also politically and socially wounded by the oppression. Fanon uses ideas from Freud and Jung to study how colonialism affects the human mind. However, he criticizes Western psychoanalysis for being incomplete. It studies family, sexuality, and childhood experiences, but ignores the effects of racism and colonial domination. Fanon argues that the psyche of a colonized person is shaped not only by personal experiences, but also by the violence and discrimination of the colonial system. The mind becomes a site where power and oppression are deeply internalized. This is the internalized inferiority. Colonized people often internalize the belief that the white colonizer is superior. This creates a desire to be white, to speak, act, or think like the colonizer. The result is alienation, or the feeling cut off from one's true identity and mimicry, copying the colonizer. This leads to a loss of authentic self and deep psychological conflict. Through colonization, the colonized person is taught to see the white colonizer as the model of beauty, intelligence, and success. Over time, they begin to desire whiteness, to speak, dress, and behave like the colonizer in order to gain acceptance. This process creates a deep psychological conflict. The colonized person feels alienated from their culture and inauthentic because they can never truly become white. Fanon calls this the tragedy of mimicry, where one imitates the oppressor but never fully belongs. These the social and cultural effects. It includes stereotypes such as intelligence, morality, or sexuality that causes shame and trauma. Daily experience of racism from school, media, or workplace or reinforce feelings of inferiority. The colonial system keeps both hierarchy and dependence alive even after political independence. Racism and stereotypes, such as those about black people being less intelligent or overly sexual, causes psychological trauma and low self-worth. These harmful ideas are reinforced every day through education, media, and social interaction. The colonized individual constantly faces reminders of inequality, which maintain feelings of dependence on the colonizer. Even after the colonial rule ends, these mental and cultural patterns often persist, keeping the social hierarchy alive in people's mind.
Thank you, Mr. Almero, and for the last slide, I'll be discussing the core insights and conclusion of Franz Fanon's Black Skin, White Mask. To sum up, Fanon explained that racism doesn't only exist in society, it also lives inside the mind. The black person's identity is shaped and wounded by the white, reduces them to skin color and stereotypes instead of seeing them as human. This leads to feelings of shame, anger, and desire to be white, because whiteness is seen as standard. It even introduces phobogenesis, as mentioned earlier, which black men became an object of fear for whites, and that fear gets internalized, creating self-doubt and trauma. Fanon also criticized Western psychology for ignoring the mental effects of colonialism. While he sees negritude or black pride as empowering, he warns that real freedom means more than reversing racism. True liberation happens when both black and white people move beyond racial roles and see each other simply as human. So Fanon believes that liberation must happen in two ways, not just by changing political and social system, but also by freeing the mind from racial labels and stereotypes. True freedom, he says, begins when both black and white people stop defining each other by race and instead see each other as people. In conclusion, Fanon reminds us that racism is not only a social issue, it is also a psychological and existential. It affects how people exist and think about themselves. Real liberation can only happen when we stop living through these roles of white and black and start creating new kind of humanism, one that values every person equally. His message remains powerful today that to truly end racism, we must not only change laws and system, but also the mental and emotional ones caused by colonialism. We must decolonialize our thoughts, our perceptions, and our understanding of identity. To end, Fanon's ideas really made us think about how deep racism goes. It's not just about unfair treatment or system. It is also about how people start to see themselves through what others say about them. To realize that racism can damage someone's confidence and make them doubt about their worth. To agree with Fanon that freedom starts in mind, we can really be free if we still think in terms of black and white. Real equality means seeing each other as human first, not by color. Here ends our presentation. Thank you so much, and again, we are the Group 6.